Now, what are the lessons can we learn from Karl Marx? Now, this is going to shock you. I was an early student of Karl Marx, and I'll explain why. My parents are immigrants, like a lot of people in Canada from Italy, and they both worked in the factory. And because of working in the factory, I've always was concerned about safety and their standard of living, and they were typical of immigrants. Worked all the time, rarely took any time off, and so naturally, when I was young, it appealed to me. Now, of course, that changed over a period of time as when I got involved in the investment business. It's the same thing. I'm always concerned about people and the average person and their standard of living. That hasn't changed. But my core belief has changed about economics once I became educated and understanding the difference from communism, socialism, authoritarianism, capitalism, communism, all the different isms. Oh, by the way, this current system, I think the perfect name by Richard Duncan is creditism, right? It needs perpetual credit, growing exponentially to sustain itself, right? The form of capitalism we have in its true form ended in 71. But here's something that's going to shock you, coming back to Marx. And the reason I wanted to articulate this message, I saw one political party pitting against another political party that they don't really care about the average person. Well, here's something that I learned in economics, studying all forms. And I'm glad I did and still am a student of Marx. And I'll tell you the problem with Marxism or communism or socialism, why it will fail, why it doesn't work. But there is something we can learn during Karl Marx's life. It's important to understand why governments have adopted this philosophy, to be in control. They could dictate the economy. But let's look at something that Marx didn't experience. Now, this is Kondratyev's four waves since the Industrial Revolution, right? And you see these cycles, boom, bust, depression, boom, bust, depression, boom, bust, depression, right? And that's where we're headed. Nothing can change that course, not even Keynesian economics, not central banks, not governments. Nothing can stop these cycles. But what happened during Marx's life, which I came to understand, is that he only lived through one cycle or one long wave. And he saw the concentration of wealth. Schumpeter later on saw two long waves and understood that the bourgeois of each cycle are bankrupted in the ensuing depression, wipes them out, and then we have a new bourgeois, right? How many people have you known that have continued to have wealth or so-called generational wealth? Doesn't happen. So creative destruction cleans and purges those that are wealthy, and you can see this with empires, cities, governments, all forms of wealth. It goes through creative destruction, and you see that with industries. So that's what Marx didn't realize. And today people are making the same assumption that this pie will continue to go to the top, it's coming to a point that's going to collapse, and the wealth inequality will be corrected. Does that make sense? That's the thing. There are very few people that actually continued with their wealth, and the Kennedys is probably the best known. Simply, Joseph Kennedy saw what was coming during the Great Depression. While most millionaires were wiped out, he actually tripled his net worth. And the reason he saw it was coming, raised a lot of cash. When the Great Depression came, he bought assets very cheaply. But really what we see is this wealth inequality journey depression purges all that and realigns the system because the monetary system collapses. And then the economy is directed toward the real economy, right? That's what's coming. A lot of so-called phantom wealth will collapse. Those who are supposedly wealthy will end up in bankruptcy. So that was one lesson we can learn. Now, this one is fascinating, and this is really a chart for the gold bugs, for the Bitcoin crowd, and also socialist. Look at this chart very carefully. This is data from the UK, and what's interesting is this is the, again, look at it carefully, the UK retail price index during his whole lifetime. So I just took the data, and I actually looked at average real earnings. This is just in for inflation. Now, what happened and why the Industrial Revolution boomed there is the price of products and services were falling. Unlike the inflationary wave that we're living through in this experiment that we have since the last century, right? That's coming to an end. We saw continued prices that were falling. Now, you see that in technology, right? If you look at your cell phone, your computer, your big screen TV, most technologies. But we're seeing asset inflation in real estate, which is tied to credit inflation, right? That is, and by the way, real estate has nothing to do with capitalism. If real estate was part of capitalism, homes would cost $5,000 today, not $1 million in Toronto. So let's set the story straight here. Only reason a home is worth $1 million in Toronto here where I live is because of credit inflation. And that's all phantom wealth. But getting back to this chart, is real wages were increasing. So not only were products and services becoming cheaper, but wages were going up. The standard of living was going up. And this is what the gold bugs, the monetary, sound monetary believers and the Bitcoin is what they're addressing. What they're addressing is that your wealth is being usurped from governments through this taxation or hidden taxation, which is inflation. And you're seeing your wages deteriorate as things become more expensive, where during Marx's lifetime, when he spent most of his life, wasn't born there in the UK, but he saw the standard of living. So that we saw a mass rise of real wealth. So if you want to talk about protecting the poor, protecting the wages of, and this is Canadians, Americans, Europeans, whatever. If you're concerned about their standard of living, the very first thing you need to address is a sound monetary system. A sound monetary system that protects their wages so they don't have to indebt themselves to sustain their standard of living. And that's why in Canada, our standard of living started to decline in the early 80s. Real wages have gone nowhere. What Canadians have done is they've gone into debt to purchase a home, and interest rates enabled that credit inflation. And that's over. It's done with. Economic winter is coming on our door, right? I keep saying it's knocking on our door. Because that's not real wealth. Real wealth is created by your wages increasing and the products and services, and you could save, and your savings would increase in real value. But I think during that time, your wages were increasing. So my beef with any kind of socialist is if you don't speak about the monetary and a sound monetary system, you are not addressing the core issue of why we have poverty. We have the technology to make everybody wealthy today. There is all the reasons why we can make people wealthy. But without a sound monetary system to protect the wages of the average Canadian, European, American, well, that's all for naught. It's nothing because the government cannot support you unless they're creating real wealth and devaluing the currency and going into debt. And this is the wall they're hitting, right? There is no representation without a sound monetary system to protect the average person. So this is the lesson of Marx. This is what we've learned about Marx. And he had some ideas, but obviously he believed government could control the future of the economy, and they can't. And we've seen that now with where they are in central banks. I mean, they've just made the situation worse. Yes, I've gone 180, but it's just because I'm looking at the facts. I'm a student of history. I'm a student of Marx, but I'm a student of Schumpeter and Kondratiev and Kuznets, simply to try to understand how things work. And I realize that it's the entrepreneurs and Schumpeter's creative destruction is why we have such wealth today compared to history. Oh, there's dynasties that and empires that lasted longer, but what was the standard of living of those people? Not the options we have today. Anyways, I thought that was an important insight about addressing the socialist agenda, addressing Marx's life, addressing the concern today, because today is not the capitalists that are pigs. It's not the capitalist. A true capitalist will drive an industry and make the product and or service cheaper. That's what capitalism, saving and investment, increase productivity. That productivity increases wealth. That wealth is passed on to the wages of the worker, and that worker's wages increases, then the taxation of the government, which pays for the social programs. If you're not creating wealth through productivity, there is no social programs to support. Something to think about. Thanks for listening. Don't forget to follow, subscribe, and let your friends know who would be interested in understanding the economic long wave and how to survive during economic winter. Thanks again.